So our first presenter on student-driven data, OER, is Stephen Mills, and our second presenter will be Ted Neal. Stephen, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Mills. I'm hoping this will be somewhat casual. Let me share my screen where you should be able to see my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because I have two screens up and I forgot. All right, so I thought I'd start with a little bit of background of who I am. I'm a Spanish professor. I teach everything from beginning Spanish to senior seminar, literature, culture, history. For the purpose of this presentation and my time with you today, this is the first time I've experienced an OER. I'm using one for the first time this semester, and last semester when I was working on the project that I'm presenting on today, it was my first time ever trying to create an OER. So I am not very experienced, but I thought I'd go out on a limb and try something new. I was at a presentation where someone suggested they wrote an OER for an English class, and I thought that seems interesting. The reason why I thought that was interesting is because in this particular class I was working with, it's a culture class, I'm stuck with the traditional texts, and they look like this. This is History and Culture in Spain, written in Spanish by professors, for professors and graduate students. It's a lot of complex text, and my students were not really able to engage that. And so there's a problem, a disconnect between the students and the text. And this gave in the presentation, this gave the students an opportunity to engage in the writing process and in the material. So I thought, instead of giving them this, maybe I'll give them a new experience. My students, most of them are not native speakers. All of them are not native readers. They're heritage speakers, and so they can't engage this easily or readily. And these texts are common in the industry. It's what people have used. It's what I used in graduate school. It's what I used in undergrad, and it's what I've taught with for the last 10 years. And I have my efforts are what I've had to rely on to allow them to access this and understand what it's saying. So I spent a lot of time interpreting, and it's just not very effective, and it's very discouraging for them. So my idea was, maybe I can have them write something. I thought if they were to write a text, it would be at their level. I could help them with correct grammar, but they would be writing in something that they could understand. And my questions were, can I do this and still meet the objectives of the class? I want them to be able to engage the material, to understand the culture. This particular class was the history and culture of Spain. So can they understand the events and the importance of the events and how it's related to what Spain is today, while being able to write a text? My other question was, how can I help students want to do this? I'm not sure if you are familiar with this kind of students, but a lot of times students are trying to do less work than what I hope that they would do. And so I want to be able to motivate them to participate, to fight those apathy tendencies that they often struggle with. And then, if I want them to create a text that I could actually use in the future, can I help them get to the quality of writing and content that would merit publishing this as an OER, either for my own classroom or for other classrooms, and make it available to other people? These are my questions that I was trying to fight with, and all the while make sure they get out of the class what I want them to understand how the culture and history of Spain effectively grew into what it is today. So I looked at my objectives for the course, and I had to decide what was essential and what was not. Because if I'm having them write an OER, or the content for an OER, what do I have to give up to make room for other projects and other assignments? What kind of assignment will they need to do? And what do I want them to be able to do at the end of this? the objectives are, I try to focus on student abilities and outcomes as part of the objectives. And then how can I guide them through the process? If they're writing, how can I make sure they're doing it right and doing it well? And so I thought about making it an assignment, so that gives them the motivation. It's something they will get points for and go toward their grade. I gave them a structure. This is what I want it to include, what I want it to look like. And then an example. I tried to provide an example of what the kind of writing was that I wanted. So this is how I started off the assignment at the beginning of the semester. I realized it would have been helpful if I would have pulled up the assignment prompt, but I forgot. I didn't think about that, so I don't have it. But later in the question period, if you want, I can pull that up. So I like the idea because it got them more involved in the class. Normally with the traditional texts, they read a bunch of stuff that they don't understand. I work through it with them, and then I explain, or I help them understand why it's important and what it means in modern society in Spain. This new approach, they would write the content and they would internalize it. And they would research topics, and then in the research and the writing about it, they would understand it better than if they just read somebody else's writings about it. The other part is they got to choose the topic. Instead of me telling them, you have to write about this, I gave them relevant topics to the period that we were studying for that given week. And they got to choose one, they do some research on it, and then they do the write-up on it. So I was hoping that they would be more invested because they would get to choose something that they thought was interesting. So it was student-driven, student-directed. I thought this is a win-win situation. So that was my hope going into this. The goal, part of the goal, one of the goals wasn't that they come out being experts in the history of Spain. I want them to understand the culture, but I also want them to be able to speak better and write better. And so I try and use the topics as conversation points as well and apply it to their own life. And so in this course, I wanted to include a lot of writing and a lot of speaking as they process this content. And so that's kind of how I wanted the objectives to go. I wanted that to come out of this. They're still developing Spanish. I think this slide, I've already touched on the topics, but I want them to be able to read and write, to speak and improve all these skills: listening, comprehension, writing skills, speaking skills. So that's how I was moving into the assignment. And here were the assignment and the objectives. This is what I created to help them write the OER. First, they would research a historical topic. Then they would research a cultural topic. Historical topic could be something, let's talk about the Roman period in Spain. So they could research an emperor that was particularly impactful, or some element of Roman government that was impactful for Spain. And then a cultural topic, a piece of art, a mosaic, a statue, something that relates Rome to Spain. And then they also had to look at how this period is still relevant in today's society, affecting society or how they see it. And so they had to do these 3 write-ups every week, and they were short. It wasn't an onerous assignment. It was between a half a page and a page of writing for each one of these. And then we would talk about them every day in class. So they were due before class. They come to class, and their task was to teach a couple partners about what they wrote and what they learned. So that covers the writing, it covers the conversation. They knew the subject because they wrote about it. And so they had the vocabulary that they needed and the structures, and so they were able to improve their speaking and the writing and the reading in the process of the assignment. That's how I tried to cover all my bases, meet my objectives, and still be able to create a text for them. So what worked and what didn't? The students were involved. They did a lot of writing and they did a lot of reading, and it was great. They did a lot of conversing about what they wrote, and some of them found some really great materials that they really enjoyed writing about. The revision, the editing process was somewhat lackadaisical. A lot of times they didn't care a whole lot about producing great quality of work. And I think part of that's because I had them write a lot. And so they didn't have time to really focus on correct grammar and spelling and structures. There was often missing information where they would have big, vague gaps, statements, overarching statements that didn't really explain the period. And so it would have required a lot of editing to go out and create those, make those much more specific and informative to future students. So it worked in that I was able to help them write and speak, and I met the objectives of the class in that way. But the text that came out of it wasn't as great as I wished it would have been. It was hard to direct the work, and the students, sometimes you have students who struggle, not just with the class, but being a student. And so I started with 11 students. At various points in the semester, I was only getting 6 or 7 assignments, and so it wasn't covering the entire base of information that I was hoping we could include in the OER, so it limited what I was able to include in the text. The quality diminished throughout the semester, particularly during midterms and finals week. Understandably, their focus sometimes is better than others, ebbed and flowed. And it was hard to assess the outcomes as far as what I wanted them to get versus what I wanted to produce in the class. Some successes, the writing that they did produce was incredibly accessible. I think that if I were to use this instead of a normal textbook for this class in the future, it would be much easier to understand for students who are in their similar situation. And I really appreciate that. It was informative. They had some great topics, and they did some great research. And it was interesting. They found some pictures, and they turned it into something that I think future students really could use. It just needs some revisions. And so that comes back to my concerns. How do I create a reliable text that every entry is consistent and effective in what it gives? They went to the internet. Some of their stuff was probably copyrighted. So how can we focus on avoiding that? Particularly the images. I did find in some areas there was a lot of free images out there that I could have used, but students weren't looking for that. They were just Googling images. And then there was no style or format consistency. I did have a student make a consistent style. They took all the student work and put it into a consistent style, so that part works out, but then publishing it, that's a different question. So as I approach the end, some takeaways. As you think, if you want students to engage and produce some sort of OER, I would say, make sure your learning objectives are clear and that they can be consistent with the OER that you're trying to produce. Try and create writing activities to produce an OER that are consistent with and enhance those objectives, and create clear assessment tools. What makes a good essay or good in product versus subpar, and how can you help them be there? You got to balance those. Do you have to compensate, or do you have to maybe back off on the OER objective to help them get what you want out of the class, or can you do both? I had to cover, if I were to do it again, I would cover less material and I would help them edit more. Editing would help them learn the writing process better, and I didn't get to do that. I would probably do fewer assignments as well and have them focus a little more on producing a higher quality. This could be something I could do over multiple semesters. They write it one semester, we edit it in another, or we break it up and they write less and we cover less in one semester, but it's a 2-semester course. I would provide them a better template about what to write and an example entry so they could see what works well. So I hope this helped. I would like to answer any questions. Ted and I talked, and we thought it'd be a good idea to answer questions between. So you can, if something I said triggered, you can ask questions and he'll answer afterwards. But it was a moderate success. I'm glad I did it. I don't have a finished product yet, but I would like to keep going with it and not stop. So.
We have questions for Stephen. I have one. Stephen is really like this and appreciate it and thinking how I can do this within the course that I teach. But is this something, because it's a 2-semester, do you see this, as you had said, are you going to be working, is your vision to progress so they're doing it over the 2 semesters? Or is that something that you envision, well, that would be cut off, or would future students be using this?
That's a good question. My courses are all single semester courses. I don't have the option of doing it over 2 semesters unless I go to my dean and say, hey, I have this experiment that I want to do. I want to change it up. And that's not something that I did. So right now, I would probably take what was written before and apply it in the next class, next iteration of this class, and say, this is what students did. Let's fix their work and add to it a little bit. We have a really good foundation because they wrote so much. And so it will take multiple semesters, but probably multiple classes as well.
In the chat, we have a question. Does your institution library provide any support?
Yes. So I was in frequent communication with my librarian. In fact, I think she might be here, Jody. She was very helpful in offering suggestions and connecting me to resources. We also have a technical support office on campus, and they were willing to help me put in some sort of publishable format to make it easier to revise and edit in the future. I haven't gotten with them this semester, but she was very helpful. She offered resources. She's the one that helped me find images that are free to use in copyright law. So, yes.
Nice. So another question came in. Oh, and Jody says hello. And another question did come in. If you plan to publish this at some point, what do you need from the students to approve that?
That is a good question. And I have talked with Jody about that. And we have to have some sort of permission. Exactly what that looks like, I haven't gotten there yet. And it's not because the question hasn't been asked, it's because we've never done this before. Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. We haven't done this before, so the question hasn't come up before. And so the administration part of the university has to say, what does this have to look like? And what does it have to include? And so I don't have a very good answer, but it is something that I asked, and it's something that we're exploring. Because the students have to say, yes, you can use this. And I want to get that squared away before they graduate so that the students who already wrote can fill out that permission.
That's awesome. And I'm sure in terms of engagement, you've, like you said, it's probably gone through the roof compared to being talked at. That's awesome. Thank you so very much, Stephen. Will everybody please use your emojis, and let's give Stephen a round of applause. Thank you. Coming up next here, we have Ted Neal. Ted, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, that sounds great. I can't see myself anymore, so I'm assuming I'm on here. I'm assuming you all can hear me. So my name is Ted Neal. I'm a professor at the University of Iowa. I was a public school teacher for 9 years, 7 in the States, a couple international. And I've been down at the University of Iowa for 13 years now. And the course I'm going to be talking about is an elementary science methods class. So these are 20-year-olds who typically are terrified of science. They don't like science, but they're going to go and teach it. And that's always a fun medium to play in, as kids who are terrified of something that they're going to get to do. And so what happened historically, just a little bbit of a background, I wrote my first OER textbook, and I can drop these into the chat so you can see them. I wrote my first OER OER textbook about climate change. And I wrote that one with a bunch of scientists. And so that one, but it was based around the idea of pedagogically teaching climate science, that then morphed into this gigantic endeavor to write an entire curriculum for the state of Iowa on how we should teach 8th grade science across the whole entire school year due to new science standards. So I'd had a little bit of experience doing an OER. And then we had the opportunity to present a case to make a second OER. And so stepping back, we took on the challenge of how to make an OER accessible to students that would be relevant and valuable to them in a way that doesn't scare them. And so I've put the book in the chat, and I want to share my screen here in a minute and share it with you, but this way you at least have it. So the course itself is actually a year-long course. So as Stephen just said, his is a semester-long course. So I had actually a year-long course, but we started with the development of just the second semester of an OER textbook. And what we did in that semester was, after a group of students had taken my class, I actually just hired four of my top students, and said, I'd like to hire you guys to help me write an online textbook. And that online textbook amounted to then this adventure with these students, which hopefully you can see my screen now, where they wrote an intro, and it's from my four students. So they wrote it from the lens of what would they have wanted and what would have made life better for them when they took my class as a student. And so I gave them access to everything. So they had access to my exams, they had access to the documents, they had access to quizzes, they had access to my students. So they would ask questions to the students as they were writing the book. And so we had a live feedback mechanism to it. So in essence, they spent the first semester writing what became this space science chapter. And so within the area of space science, the first part of what became the second semester for these kids, there's a reason I'm trying to keep it two separated here. There were four sections: learning about where the Earth came from, how I have a moon, what is the solar system, where did the universe, and what's its origins. Very basic space science content stuff. And so the actual book itself then became aligned with my students. If you heard the keynote speaker talk a little bit ago, she was talking about how she had, some difficulties with keeping it engaging and exciting in these pieces. And how do you morph and shape all of that? And so what we do is we don't actually use the textbook at all to begin with, but they do take a formative assessment probe. So each chapter of the textbook is a unit we're going to talk about. And so each one has links to a very simple Google Doc. And so this is going to link to this private universe quiz that my students take. Theoretically, if my internet will keep up and actually open it. They'll take a formative assessment quiz that tells me then as the instructor where they're at about this chapter before we even get into the chapter. Okay. And it's clearly going to take a long time to load here. So I'll just switch back out. So the students then, back that up. Okay. So formative assessment to start the whole chapter of each section of a textbook. Then my students who wrote the textbook that got into then all of the big ideas: heliocentrism, geocentrism. These are the big ideas we talk about. And what's really nice about the press book, they were able to drop in things like heliocentrism. They were able to put in little breakdown things and talk about what does that mean. And it's like they'll pop up little study guides, and there's a big word bank at the end of the whole thing. Phases of the moon, these are all the big things they put in. They were able to bring in images. They were able to bring in videos from the internet, drop them into the textbook. I think this one, they actually made their own video that they stuck into this particular first chapter. But it aligned with everything we did in the class. And it also aligned with just like a video my students actually made talking about shadows and where shadows happen and how they happen. And then linking it to the standards. So that was a really important piece for future teachers to be able to link this to what are those future science standards, and anybody in education knows there's standards related to everything. So making that connection. Now, what happened with the book then, so in my class, the students built this, and they built a chapter for basically every week. So that's week one. This would be week two. We talk about the stars and the moon, the solar system. So these would be the formative assessments the kids would take. So here's one on the moon. It loaded much quicker. Quick little multiple choice. And I was able to then ascertain a very quick picture of what my kids think, which is fantastically entertaining, because every kid that I've ever taught, I think in elementary, tells me that we have seasons because we are closer to the sun, which is their life experience. So it really sets up an opportunity to really engage in that disequilibrium that they need to battle through to understand science. So again, same setup, some content pieces, a video from Ben, one of my students. And in essence, the video the book replicates what we do in the labs as well. Okay, so it's an on-site piece, and then each one we work through multiple sections, and then there's actually a quiz because students are always like, I know you're going to quiz me on this. How does this work? So there's actually a link to practice quiz questions that they have here. They can link into this practice quiz, run through all those scenarios, trying to understand what's going on. So the power of this became for my book, really giving the chance to my students to say, you build it, we'll see what happens, right? So the way it worked was I hired kids who had taken the class. I then piloted it the next semester. So they graduated from the class, passed the class. They wrote it over the next semester by visiting the class, looking at the stuff, talking to students. They built it. And then the next semester we piloted it in the class. And I actually hired off of the grant a couple of students within the class to give weekly feedback so we could update and adapt and adjust and find all of the loopholes and things that we were screwing up, so to speak. I just heard somebody, the keynote, say she wrote her initial grant to get money out of the deal. I wrote mine and gave away all the money. So I guess I felt my students needed it more, and they were doing all the real heavy lifting. So we got to the end of, say, a year and a half in. Textbook had been written at the point where the students were really comfortable with it. And then, of course, massive changes happened in the university setting. This would be in what we call Science Methods 2. There's a Science Methods 1. The Science Method 1 includes biology and chemistry. So my colleague wrote a grant and then did the same model I did and built a textbook to match what that particular content area was. And so he built this biology piece, and then there's this physical science piece, which is all goofy. So within the biology, they covered things, living things, ecology, genetic material, natural selection. So he wrote what became semester 1. I wrote what became semester 2, which we actually wrote first. And then last year we had massive changes again. Instead of having a methods 1 and a methods 2, we now have a 1-year course where 10 weeks is biology taught by a professor, 10 weeks is physical science taught by a professor, and 10 weeks is Earth space taught by me. And that 10-week middle one is split by either winter break or summer break. And this is really where this textbook starts to become a lot more powerful, because then also during that time, the staff member who wrote the first one left. We brought in a new person, we brought in another new person, and we just hired a third new person who's going to be starting at the university teaching the biology section here coming up. So one of the things I really, really, really like about it is that we are able to take this textbook, and it's such a live document that as a new instructor comes in, there are things that they will want to do because it's their definition of the world and what they want to teach in biology. And so if I go to, these are getting into the back pages of how this works, but you can see I've got old versions and I've got new versions, and I've got things that don't exist online and things that do exist online. So as my students have an interest in learning different things as we go. So for example, kids might be interested in playground physics and want to know, how do swings work and how do slides work and playground stuff for elementary kids. But some elementary kids want to know about wind turbines and how that works, or electricity, or different things like that, because Iowa's a big wind generating state. And so what we ended up with is the ability to then say, I can teach this week, and the students will then look at that. And then next week I can change out the chapters. So I can take the chapters, I can pull this unit out, put this idea in, because that's where the kids want to go. So what we've then gotten to now, the final, well, not the final, because we had a new person coming in. This is all going to twist itself a little bit. But what we then do with the kids is the kids have a lab on a Monday where they play with, for example, this was what is the relationship between the sun and the earth and the moon? And they had a globe and a flashlight and a golf ball. And they were playing with how the orbits and rotations work. And so what they do in lab on Monday, they write down, this is what I did. So the students have a blog. They have an online blog, and their blog is to be their forced study. Okay. And so they tell me, what do they do in lab? What are the big questions? Then we have a discussion on Thursday. And here you can see where they're discussing what we talked about on Thursday. They're trying to clarify their understandings and wrap their heads around it. And then to wrap it up, there's then a textbook reading component to it as well, where students have an expectation that what did they learn out of the textbook? What was most helpful? What do you need more information on? And what questions and comments and concerns do you have so far? Right. And so that is how we then have a weekly check-in with the students on the usage of the textbook, and give them that opportunity. And what's really nice, I'll stop sharing the screen if there's nothing that's not hugely vital there. What I then can do in my classroom is I have a document that has all of the students' blogs listed, and I can say, okay, Erica McBride, you're going to read whoever's name is next alphabetically below you. And so Erica will pull up the next person's blog, read their post about the textbook and the class and what questions and concerns other kids have, which gives them the safe learning environment component where they're not having to worry about feeling ostracized for asking what they consider or deem to be an odd question. So the usage of the book is really, really complex and really, really massive, but it started by saying, who's the best audience to write the book? And it's the students, in my opinion, right? I can talk all day and teach all day, and at the end of the day, kids hear A, B, and C, and I said D, E, and F, and there's a disconnect sometimes. And so having the students be the driver of the book was a really critical part. Having the book be malleable and adjustable to new semesters, to new real world events, to, if I was teaching social studies, I'd be pulling in a chapter on Ukraine and Russia right now, right? And putting that in there, and I could put it in there and it would cost me no money. And which is a huge thing for the kids. When I first introduced the textbook, I had one of my students, I said, okay, open the textbook to the third chapter. And she wouldn't do anything. She's just sitting there. And I said, why don't you open your textbook? She goes, I haven't had the money to buy it yet. I said, oh God, I said, no. I said, we didn't write it so you had to buy it. I said, it's completely free. Use it however you want. She's like, and she starts crying. She's like, oh my God, I had no money. I was trying to figure out how I was going to do this. I was going to get through the class. I'm like, oh my God, kid, I'm so sorry that you didn't understand that it's it's open education. It's a free book. So then the power then becomes like with my kids now we've got the whole thing's up and running. I can say, okay, what issues and concerns and questions do the kids have in the feedback loop? And I can add to the chapter. So I had a kid send me a goofy GIF today about, I don't know where it was on my phone here somewhere. She sent me a GIF about the moon being sad, or the earth being sad. It's a sad face little emoji thing. They're just like, oh, it's so sad. And then the moon pops up and it's happy as the moon rotates around. And it's sad again as it goes to go around its head. Little things like that help kids. Takes me less than 15 seconds to add that to the textbook. And then the kids feel proud of it. They have ownership of it, and they're invested in the book as well. And the book grows and it grows and it grows. So where does it end? No idea. I think it's always going to be something that lives and changes and morphs and adapts itself as we continue to make new iterations. The future goal is to make there be 3 semester long classes. So this will be a trifecta of a book. But what we've done is we've followed the same format and structure. And we've, instead of having right now 2 books, it's down to 1 book. We've morphed everything into 1. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to split everything out and add 5-week chapters into the whole thing and make it a 3 semester long singular textbook that will follow the same pathway, where kids will have access to the biology section, the physical science section, the aerospace section, following that kind of the ideas of formative assessments, content understanding, keywords, practice quizzes, science standards. Those are kind of the big themes that we basically have in each chapter. Then there are some front-loaded matter stuff, intros. There's even a chapter on how to use the OER textbook that my students made a video of, like, how do you use it? Why do you use it? What's the benefit? I have noticed kids' test scores grow. The content hasn't changed and the testing hasn't changed. And the only thing that's really changed is the structure of the textbook, and the kids relate to it and they understand it. And so you see comprehension coming out of your students at a much higher level. So that's what I've got to share. I'm open to whatever questions y'all want to ask about this textbook, the last textbook, the next textbook, any of those things. So
Please place your questions in the chat. Thank you, Ted. This is got my head spinning in terms of how more can do this. And so through the grants, and reiterating what you said as I'm processing, was you were able to pay your students to help you develop this through that grant work, which is fantastic.
So the initial grant we proposed was I want to say it was $10,000, maybe it was $5,000. I don't remember. My sponsor's here with me, so she could answer if she really wants to. I don't remember how much it was. And kind of my initial thought was, oh, this is great. I'm going to make a little bit of money over the summer and I'm going to write this little textbook. And instead what it came down to is I had an extremely talented student, and she's like, I got it. And so she was my lead person who really kind of made everything click. And then we hired, so it was 4 of them total that we hired the first year, and they were on an hourly basis, and they all picked their favorite components of it. So some really liked making videos that they could upload. Some liked the standards pieces. They're different pieces, and they would run it by me. We would meet every couple of weeks, and they would tell me what they've got in their, in the works. They would align it directly out of the class stuff. Like I said, they had access to everything, so they would pull it and basically plug and play. So
That's awesome. We do have a question in the chat. How would you approach faculty who have never tried a project like this? And then what would you say?
That's a great question, Kayla. In fact, I just brought this up to my faculty last week. I have several visions into the world of how this works, because my students are very open with me. And so I regularly listen to them say, I spent $150 on this textbook that all it really is photocopied paper, and it's not even 3-hole punched. And somebody wrote it and it's pointless and they never use it. Or they get these other books that are paying $300 for, and they don't hardly ever use those. So what I say to my colleagues is that we're in a time where the cost of kids going to college is exorbitant, and anything we can do to lessen that burden on our students, I feel we have a moral obligation to try to help them out. And so what I ask them to do is just to reflect and ask their students that direct question. How much do I use the book? How much did I pay for said book? How much value is in that book? Is the professor even testing out of that book? A lot of times these books are supplemental to the whole actual course. You don't need them to pay. My senior year in college, I decided to get through the whole senior year without buying textbooks, just to see if I could, because I was so dismayed by the whole idea of textbooks. So I'm not even doing it. And I didn't buy textbooks. I triple majored. So I've always had a disdain for them. So that's the conversation I have with them, Kayla, is to say, how can I help you guys lay something out? And if they're like, I'm too busy, I said, that's great. It's okay for you to be too busy, because you had students who already took the class. Have them help you to build this and have them help you to support it. I think it's a huge, huge opportunity that we miss on a regular basis. In fact, I just told, we have a business college that wants to talk about it. So I will come over and talk to the business college. I think so. That's the other part, is people who've done them, is have the people who've done them go and talk, because they're going to be passionate about it. And they're going to have skin in the game, and they're going to be able to answer some of those difficult questions, like how do you do it? That's where I would go with that, Kayla.
So this is to follow up on that. Much like teaching, right? The first year is always the hardest. Is that how you'd say this project, just getting it off the ground, starting somewhere with a foundation and then building?
Yeah, getting it off the ground. So, we had a little bit of knowledge, because the first time we wrote this textbook for the 8th grade science, we just wanted to write a chapter on climate science. And we didn't end up just writing the chapter on climate science. We wrote that one and then went, wow, we maybe ought to consider writing one for all of this genre of science. And so we had some practice with it, so we knew a little bit about where we were going. But certainly round one is, how do you do it? And I just dropped the other press book that I've written into the chat if people want that as well. I would say the hardest part, Kyle, is deciding what you want chapters to look like. So for me, it was, I want a formative assessment. I want some content. I want some, videos or supporting materials to the content. I want the standards, and I want practice assessments for the kids. That to me was the structure. Once we had the structure down, but they had a template, it didn't become all that complex then. It was like you get to the next chapter. Okay, we're talking about the sun and the moon today. Tomorrow we're talking about the rock cycle. Great, let's talk about the rock cycle. What's a formative assessment? Here's a formative assessment. What is a rock? You have a whole list of things that could or couldn't be rocks. Is marble a rock? Is granite a rock? Is a headstone a rock? So you have a formative assessment. Here's the content. Crust, mantle, core. Here's how the earth works. Boom. What are some teacher level friendly, right? Because if you look in the textbook, you'll see this isn't a science book. It is written for the layperson. It's written at about a 7th grade reading level. And that's all I need my elementary kids to be able to do is handle middle school science, right? And so it wasn't written in this didactic, like huge, long, verbose, huge words that are completely overwhelming to those kids, and to most of us, myself included. And then we eventually went back and dropped the standards in. That wasn't an initial component. That's something that came later. We got better. We learned how to build a glossary. We learned as we went. We were able to go back and edit and put in other pieces, which is really nice. We didn't have to get it right the first time. We had to get it as best we could the first time. And then we used it with kids and got feedback from them. And they're like, we wish we had this, or we wish we had that, or can you add this? And so we used our clients to help us really tweak what we were doing.
That's amazing. Well, the template's there, right? So Ted gave us some of the template on how to get it. It's starting that, how to get started there and building off of. So thank you very much, Ted. Phenomenal hearing you and Stephen and your practices to be more student driven with OER. Any other questions? Thank you there. So please give Ted a round of applause through your emojis. Thank you so much, Ted. Our next presentation will start at 2 p.m. Central Time. Look forward to seeing you all there again. Thank you so very much, Ted and Stephen. Phenomenal job in keeping us engaged. So thank you.
If anybody needs anything, feel free to reach out, send me an email. It's in the thing somewhere. So.